Romance isn't just about happily ever afters. It's about exploring the full spectrum of the human experience, including sexuality and identity. Join us today for an enlightening conversation with Margherita Scialla. Listener discretion is advised. This podcast contains mature content intended for adult audiences only. I am so excited to chat with you today. Thank you so much for being on. Let's go ahead and dive right into your books. So I have seen you around Bookstagram, and then when I saw you were an author, I was like, yes, please. And so I recently read Pillow Forts and Hurricanes. Loved it so much. It's just so sweet and cozy and just, I wanted to eat it up. So let's go into where your author journey started. What are some of the books that you have under your name?
Hello, first of all. I write with two names, with Margherita, which is my real name, and then with a pen name, which is Robin Jo Margaret. I started as Margherita in 2021, I believe, if I remember correctly. And I've always been into stories. I've been writing since I was 5 years old, and I didn't know how to write yet. So I was forcing my dad to write what I was telling him. And I always knew that I wanted to do this. Maybe not like a job, but like a hobby, for sure. At one point, I decided that I had to publish something, otherwise I wasn't going to take it seriously. My first book is not really up to my standards, my current standards, but I'm happy that I published something so that I could actually start this author journey.
So how do your two author names work in tandem? So what can people expect from Margarita and what can people expect from Robin?
With Margherita, I have currently 4 books. They are more young adult and new adult, but for people my age, I'm currently 23. And they're mostly contemporary romance or contemporary stories, apart from one, which is fantasy, but that was a fluke. And I want to keep writing contemporary romance as Margherita. And from now on, I will probably also write more adult contemporary romance. And for my pen name, I usually write monster romance or paranormal romance, and it's definitely more on the steamy side of things.
You have a lot of LGBTQIA plus identities in your books. Why is that important to you specifically and for your readers?
It's important for me specifically because I am also part of the LGBT community. I unfortunately have many of those labels. I say unfortunately because they get messy after a while and very confusing when they mix with each other. But I identify with many of those. So I find it very important to write my own experiences because it helps me understand them better. Because sometimes I have the thoughts in my head, but until I put them down into writing, I don't really understand what they are, what they mean. So I write the stories with my own identities to help myself and also to see people like me be happy and find love and things like that. But I also want to write other identities that don't really have anything to do with me because I want other people also to feel seen with my writing. So as of now, I think I have all of the identities of the LGBT community apart from intersex, but I do have books planned with intersex characters as well. So soon I will probably complete the whole list.
I love that. I think that it's so important for people to understand experiences outside of our own. While I might not consider myself, at least before I saw a lot of your content, ace at all, I was like, nope, I wouldn't consider myself aromantic because I didn't understand what that actually meant. And I'm not asexual. And so no, I wouldn't consider myself to be part of that category. But then in reading and in learning, I was like, wait a minute. Actually, I think I might identify with some of these things. That's very interesting. And I think that when we read or write outside of our lived experience that it allows us, especially if it's done right and if it's done correctly and not with your harmful stereotypes. But when you're able to read books that really clearly state those experiences, it really allows you to have empathy and to understand someone else's lived experience in a deeper way. I think that it's so important. And kudos to you for getting all of those. It's like a bingo card. Nope, got them all. So I think that's really cool. I want to talk specifically in this conversation asexuality and aromanticism, because I think that while it is can be a very confusing topic, that at least a base understanding of it can help people to understand it. And so I personally, like I said, did not identify as aromantic until I read one of your posts where you talked through what it actually was, talked about the differences. And I thought, I actually feel a lot of that. And a lot of that is confusing to me. And I don't have those feelings. Okay. Then I went down a whole internet rabbit hole. So let's get into the very basics of aromanticism versus asexuality.
I made a post a little over a year ago, and I recently reposted everything with added content. But the basic is that asexuality and aromanticism are two different things. Asexuality is about sexual attraction, and aromanticism is about romantic attraction. They work the same way, despite being about different things. They are both spectrums, so people that identify with one or the other can feel in so many different ways, and you won't find two people that are exactly the same. And the problem is that aromanticism is not as known, so it's often conflated with asexuality, which makes people think that they are linked together or that they are the same things, but they're not. You just have to learn to differentiate them, to educate yourself on the difference between the two and the various stereotypes and what is true and what is not. There's a lot of misconceptions online, so
I couldn't even agree more. There's so many misconceptions. And I think that societally, I don't know if conflate's the right word. We combine this idea that sex equals love or romantic
yeah.
feelings. And that's not really true at all. And you have to be able to go deeper to understand the spectrum of it. So let's start with sexuality specifically. What is that? And keeping in mind that it is a spectrum, that there is a range, but where, like, correctly, how can we see that spectrum on a timeline of one side versus the other?
It's a little different to have a real timeline of the spectrum, but definitely on the left side, we have asexual, which is used as the umbrella term, but also the specific term of the individuals that feel no sexual attraction at all. For some of these asexual people, that can mean that they are sexual repulsed as well, that they don't really like the idea of sex or even hearing about it. Some asexual people might not feel attraction at all, but are still okay with talking about it or reading about it in a book. And then we also have further on the spectrum asexual people that do feel some degree of sexual attraction, maybe only if you developed a deep bond with a person, and that is usually called demisexuality, for example. Or there is attraction that fluctuates between no attraction at all and some attraction that is usually called gray sexuality. It's really a diverse spectrum of experiences.
I had no idea that, and this is clearly misunderstanding on my part, 100%. I learned last week that someone who identifies as asexual would still be interested in potentially writing books with smut in them, or could be potentially interested in thinking about it. And it's a way for them to explore these ideas without physically feeling them. And I was like, it makes sense in my head, but it never actually crossed my mind as a possibility.
I can make you an example if you want.
Yes, please.
Because technically I'm ace, but I write smut. I don't feel attraction to people. Yeah, my attraction is not connected to a person, but I still have a fairly high libido on my own without connecting to a person or something. I still get horny or things like that. And I usually channel that into stories to write smut, but that's not connected to a person. I don't know if it makes sense.
It does. Honestly, it does. And I don't see myself as asexual or demisexual or gray sexual. I'm on the other side. And you posted about what the other one is.
Allosexual.
Thank you. Yes, that one. And so that really, you said that, I was like, no, that makes sense. I can understand why you would feel that way and how you would feel that way. Even thinking about hormonal changes. I'm a mom. I got 2 kids.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of hormonal changes after having kids where I would still be like, I'm horny, but also don't touch me. Nobody touch me. I don't want to be touched. So I can understand the 2 things and feeling 2 things at once and it being in conflict to societal ideas of what people think other people are expected to act like. And I really loved that about your book, Pillow Forts and Hurricanes, because there was a lot of exploration of your female main character. She was having sex and she had a boyfriend and she was in a relationship, but she almost felt like she had to, while it was enjoyable, it felt like it was something that she had to do because societally that's what people did. And I thought that was such a great approach to us doing things just because we think that it's what we're supposed to do, or it's because this is what you do when you get to that part. And I'm using bunny ears for people who can't see me. That part of your relationship, you're supposed to go the next step, get the home run, etc. And I think it's so dumb. And so I loved that you took that approach and you talked through that.
Yeah, I feel like that's the same for allo people and ace and arrow people as well. There's a certain set of expectations about how you're supposed to act in a relationship, and most of us just go along with it without questioning why we're doing it or if we want to do it. And sometimes you just have to take a step back and figure out what you want, why you're doing things, and stuff like that.
Yeah. I can think of the first book I read where there was a demisexual male main character. And as the couple were exploring it, he was like, I just don't really feel attraction to people until sexual attraction to people until I get to know them and I get to like them and we've been in the same space. And then I start to feel that sexual attraction. And so then the female main character was reading up on it, was like, I think you might be demisexual. Here's what I read up on it and here's what it means. And he was able to read up on it too. And the way that they were conversing about it was just so open and so freeing. And to see that in a male main character in an industry that tends to hypersexualize men, I thought was just so beautiful. It was Role Playing by Kathy Yardley. And I loved that book so much. And then also the other book that I read was The Romantic Agenda by Claire Kahn. That was my first introduction to asexuality. And I was like, what? Oh my goodness, this is so interesting. And then even the way that the female main character was combating how both her and her best friend identified as asexual, but they approached it very differently. Her friend was perfectly fine. One of the male characters was fine having sex and taking relationships to that level, whereas she was not. And the way that she had to explain it to someone with a lot of rage and feeling of no, stop stereotyping me, stop putting me in a box. That is not at all how it is. That's not how it feels. And I just thought it was such a interesting approach to having those conversations, and also slapping across the side of the head of, come on, get it together. People are not singular things. No, we are so multifaceted as people. So speaking of asexuality and sexuality, allosexuality, how does that show up in your books specifically?
I have a couple of asexual characters. I have a asexual characters in Tears in the Water. The male main character is demisexual. We have also a side character who is both asexual and aromantic. And technically, also, the main character is ace, but they still don't know. They're questioning during the story. And by the end of the book, they don't really come to a conclusion. They just do a mental note of, I'll have to come back to this later because I'm already having another identity crisis and I cannot handle more than one right now. It's still questioning by the end of the book, but it's there.
Which I think is such a beautiful way to approach it too, of yes, we have our happily ever after, but also that doesn't mean that everything in your entire life is resolved. It doesn't mean that you have the house and the 2.5 kids and you got married. It can still be a happy for now and still be a beautiful book and still be happy ending. Like, it doesn't have to be just because you haven't figured everything out. I think we have a lot of expectations on books to almost have bookends to them of this is the start of the relationship and this is the end and everything is hunky-dory, but it's actually not.
I also have another sexual character in one of my Robin books, in my latest one, which is Blessed by the Cupid Distribution System. And the main character is, she just uses the term aspec without being specific. She doesn't really have a label. In the story, she just explains that she has a complicated relationship with attraction. And while she doesn't really feel the physical attraction for who will then become her girlfriend, she does want to try sex with her because she is curious and she feels safe with her. So she still tries.
I need to read your Robin books. I have not read any of them. I have some, but I have not read them yet. And so now I'm like adding to my TBR mentally. That's why my brain's just, yep, we're adding those to the TBR.
I have to remember the two books that you mentioned because I have not read those, so I want to put them on my TBR.
Yes. And we'll make sure we have links for all these in the show notes for anyone who's like, wait, what was that book again? We got you. It's fine. And we'll make sure that we have those linked as well. Any other ones with the sexual spectrum?
With asexuality, only these. Then I have other kind of sexualities, like I have a lot of bisexual characters, pansexual, gay, lesbian, and then I have a couple aromantic characters and also trans characters, both binary and non-binary. I have everything sprinkled in all of the books, multiple identities in multiple books.
I love it.
So making a whole list will probably take a while.
No worries. Let's go ahead and jump into the aromantic spectrum, understanding what that might look like.
It kind of works the same way as asexuality, but obviously with romantic attraction, which again it's a complicated thing because this one is also subjective, because if you ask any person what they consider romantic, they will give you a different definition. They will give you something that could be shared even between friends. It really depends on the person, what they think is romantic and what isn't, if they feel it, if they don't, or at what degree they feel it. Same as the sexuality, aromantic is used as both the umbrella term and one side of the spectrum, which is no romantic attraction at all. But again, some people can feel some kind of attraction. Some people do not feel attraction, but still decide to have relationships because they still care about the other person to some degree, even if it's not what society will consider romantic. It's all different, and it usually depends on the person.
Yeah, that's where I think it can be confusing for a lot of people, aromanticism, and what does it actually mean? I've had conversations with some girlfriends where I was like, what is romance to you guys? What does that look like? And how do you feel it? And trying to understand other people's perspective of what romance was. And that really made me realize, no, I actually don't think I really fall into feeling romantic attraction, because how I show up and love someone is fairly equal across the board between my husband and my friends. Like how I think about them and how I want to do nice things for them and what I would consider romance. I'm like, yeah, I could do that with friends though. I just also don't want to have sex with my friends.
If you try to Google what is romance, you'll get answers like taking care of the people you care about, which is so generic and literally works for family and friends as well, or to be physical with the person. And then again, this mixes with sexuality, and maybe you care about the person and you love the person romantically, but you don't want to be physical with them. So that also doesn't really apply to everyone. The definitions are so generic sometimes, so personal. It makes it so complicated. And I feel like asexuality and aromanticism are the identities of the LGBT community that give you the most doubts and imposter syndrome, because there's also a lot of pressure from people, allo people, that go like, but have you ever tried being in a relationship? Have you ever tried sex? Maybe you'll actually like it. And then you hear it so many times that you start to question yourself as well. And you're like, am I really sexual? Am I really romantic? But maybe I should try. And yeah, it's so complicated.
Yeah. Also, screw those people.
Yeah. Yeah,
Oh my goodness.
absolutely.
I mean, so especially being a parent, and one of my kids, he's at the age where, I mean, this could change as he goes through puberty. I don't know, but he's at the age where like kissing is like, oh God, gross. And it could literally be a commercial that's K Jewelers. Every kiss begins with K. And so they do a little smooch and they give a gift. And he's just, oh God, why did they do that? Oh, it's so gross. Or like if my husband comes up and he hugs me and he kisses my neck, then he's, Dad, ew, stop. And it's literally a kiss. No one's doing anything
Yeah.
inappropriate here. And so we try to make that as, hey, you can feel that way. Also, you don't push that on other people. You don't need to make a big deal about it. People are
Yeah.
going to be kissing in front of you for the rest of your life. If it bothers you and if you don't want to do it, that's okay. It's like normalizing this idea of, if you feel that way, totally okay for you. Also, don't make a big deal about it when other people are doing it, unless they're being inappropriate, right? Trying to balance this while still being like, trust yourself. To my kids, like, trust yourself, do whatever works for you. But I can never see myself being like, did you try it? To them. And
Yeah.
so screw the people that say that. It really is something that I think is a spectrum that people really have to identify for themselves. And also, you're allowed to change your ideas
Yeah, absolutely.
as you go. I told you before we started recording, but to tell the listeners, I remember a friend reached out and was like, we were talking back and forth about this aromanticism and how I identify as aromantic. And she was like, but you're married. How did that work? And I was like, health insurance is a thing. And also, I have a lot of trauma from being the oldest of 5 and having a lot of different names from my siblings. And there were like 4 different last names between my mom, me, and my siblings. And I have a lot of trauma around that. Most of it's religious trauma from people, us not all having the same last name. And so I wanted to have the same last name as my kids. That is it. And between health insurance and wanting to have the same last name as my kids, that was the decision. And we had a big party. We did not go into debt for it. And we had a lot of fun. We went on a honeymoon, had a great time. And that was really enjoyable. And I would say the part that was romantic about the honeymoon was just being with my husband. That was it. It wasn't anything that was like flowers on the bed. Sure, that was cool. The champagne was cool. The adventure of it was cool. But also, I get the same feelings of contentedness sitting next to him while he's watching TV and I'm reading a book. So I don't consider it like romantic at all. And like I said before, the feelings that I have toward him are very similar to, I want him to thrive. I want him to be his very best self. I want to do things for him that make him happy. I want to do things that make his life easier. And I also feel those things towards really close friends where I want them to be their
Yeah.
best self and I want them to be successful. And if I'm in a room with all of them, I'm not going to gravitate more towards my husband. I want to be with everybody. Right? So just that's how I was like, nope, I really don't identify as being a very romantic person or aloromantic. And so I feel more on this spectrum or on this side of the spectrum. and perfectly contented with that and just moving forward. But I'm allowed to change my mind if I decide that my definition of romance changes over
Absolutely.
time. It is something that you really just have to identify for yourself. But I think that books are such an impactful way to discover that and to
Yes.
learn more about yourself and the people around you.
Yes. Both fiction and nonfiction, because they're both equally important.
Yes. As readers, it is really important that we are incorporating the LGBTQIA plus community into our reading, whether that's through nonfiction, fiction, etc. And so I love what you and Brittany created, the Diverse Baseline Challenge. Have seen people who are posting about it and excited about it. And so give us a little bit of background to the Diverse Baseline Challenge, what it is, its purpose, and how it works.
The Diverse Baseline Challenge is specifically for reading books by non-white and mixed authors. It started in, I think it was November of 2023. Brittany and I were talking on DMs on Instagram, and we were very angry and disappointed with the Goodreads Choice Awards again, because it was, again, 99% white. And so we were discussing about the awards and some of the challenges that were already floating around BookTok and Bookstagram. And then we came up with the idea of creating a new challenge, specifically that lasted the entire year, because we wanted people to stick with the idea of reading diversity and making an effort to do it all the time, and not just for 1 or 2 months, where people, especially the ones that are doing it where it's performative, they do it or pretend to do it for a month or two and then forget about it.
Yeah.
And we wanted to help people build habits of looking up BIPOC authors and specifically searching for new books by non-white authors, to maybe even look for books in genres that you're not usually used to, just to broaden your reading choices.
For me, I need to be able to see my percentages. And when I looked at how my percentages for like BIPOC authors versus white or unknown, right? Because some authors you just don't know. And so I just categorize those together. Seeing that, I was so frustrated with myself, especially as someone who is like, yes, read BIPOC authors. I'm part of the BIPOC community. You should definitely be reading these books. It's important for our future. And like, I feel all of those things, but I was falling into the algorithm of, ooh, that looks like a good book. And I'm a mood reader, so go with the mood. And so I had to be like, when I saw that I had only read 25% of my books had been BIPOC authors, which I know is probably more than a lot of people read, but still I was disappointed in myself. And so I said, I want to change that and at least make it 45. At the time of this recording, I can happily say that I'm at 60% and I'm very happy with that choice. I feel like I have learned so much about people's experiences. I'm still enjoying the books that I'm reading. It's not like it was like, oh, well, these are different experiences and so now I'm not enjoying them. No, I am definitely enjoying them. They're all the same tropes that I love. I just took a little more searching to say, hey, I'm in the mood for a mafia romance. Where are the BIPOC author mafia romances? Where are those ones? Let's get some of those in there. And so going with, all right, I'm in the mood for this, but of the ones I have or of the ones that I could pick from, where are those BIPOC authors? And being intentional about that has allowed me to, and regular check-ins at my percentages and tracking that stuff has allowed me to see it. Now, what I love about the Diverse Baseline Challenge is that you guys have such a variety of things and like genres outside of just romance. So I almost exclusively read romance, and it did challenge me to say, hey, what are some formats or some genres that I'm could potentially read, but I'm not currently reading? Maybe it's something that if it's a historical nonfiction, I can listen to it instead of reading it because I might visually be like, oh my God, I cannot keep doing this. Whereas if I'm folding laundry, it's in my ears. Too bad. You're going to listen to it, right? It's like finding things that are going to work for me. But I did love that you guys had, I know in one of the months you had like a book of poetry. And I was like, I never would have thought to read a book of poetry by a BIPOC author. Why haven't I thought of doing that? I love poetry.
I also read mostly romance. I think 80% of the books that I read are romance and the 20% is fantasy. But I really like the fact that we chose different genres because I also wanted to branch out, especially in a lot of those genres that I really usually don't read, like horror or thriller. So I really like the fact that I had an excuse to finally try out genres that I usually don't pick up. And I even found some really cool books, new favorites in genres that I usually don't try. So that was really interesting. And I don't think that's for everyone because we did a survey that we shared in our newsletter, and a lot of people shared that they were mostly romance readers, so they didn't do all the genres prompt. But I personally feel like we should all at least try one or two genres that we don't usually try, because it's a pity that we don't go into those specific stories because they're all unique in their own way, and I feel like we're missing out.
Yeah. And I also think, no, you might not find a book of poetry in the romance section, but horror and thriller, like I can think of specific books by BIPOC authors that would fit into that were still fantastic and had some smut in them.
Yeah, there's also like fantasy romance, horror romance. You can find books that have multiple genres that can work for the prompt and still be something that you like.
Yeah. So you're doing it again in the new year. What can people expect
Yes.
when they join? I know you also have, I believe it's a Fable book club
Yes.
as well. Are you going to continue doing that? And what does that look like?
Yes. I have a Fable book club, which is specifically for romance because, as I said, I mostly read romance. This year, I tried to do in the selection that people can choose every month. I try to put at least half, or sometimes all the options are books that could fit for the prompt of one of the prompts of that month for the Diversifying challenge. So I try to mix the two things that can help some people, especially those that are slow readers, so they don't have to read one additional book and have the stress of that. Next year, Brittany is also going to do a Storygraph read along. So you can also join that. If you don't want to read the books with me, you can join her Storygraph read alongs. Next year, we're going to do this year because this comes out in 2025. This year, we're doing again the Diverse Baseline Challenge, but we have changed some things because as I mentioned, we did a survey and we wanted to know what people that participated, what they thought and what maybe advice that they had. A lot of people mentioned that it was really hard to follow the prompts because we originally in 2024, you had 3 prompts each month. In January, I remember it was one poetry, a book with a fat main character, and I think a Latin author. You had those 3 in January and you had to read those 3. And technically you could choose to switch prompts, but many people felt guilty doing that. They didn't, and then they felt, especially the mood readers, that they couldn't really read and follow along. We changed that, and now it's a minimum of 1 book each month, and you can choose which prompt you want that month. We have a list of over 70 prompts.
Wow.
You have all the choices that you want, and you can choose what to read each month, but it's a minimum of 1 book. But we always encourage people to read more than one, especially the fast readers, because they have no excuse. Read as many books as you want. You can choose the pace, you can choose the prompt. It's more like choose your own challenge,
Yeah.
basically. Build your own challenge.
I like that though. I think that you're right. People who read a ton of books do not have any excuses. And that's where I think those percentages for me really help because I read upwards of 250 books a year. And so if 25% of those are BIPOC authors, where if I can change that to having even more books, then I'm amplifying based on the percentages. I'm amplifying a lot more voices with that percentage than I would with just a smaller percentage. And just saying, oh, well, I did my 12 books this year, but I also read 200 and something other books. I don't think that you're really making the impact that you might want to be making by doing that. And so I agree. People who read a lot more books, fewer excuses. And I think we should challenge ourselves to read outside of our scope. I know for me, we're recording this in November, so a lot of people do their 10 before the end. And that always felt really restrictive to me of like giving myself a TBR, especially as a mood reader. And so I shifted that. I said, look, I'm going to read 2 new books, 2 new authors to me. I'm going to read 2 backlog books, so books from authors that I loved, that I want to get through some of their backlog. I want to finish 2 challenges. I want to read 2 books that were recommended by friends. And I want to read 2 new formats. And so one of those formats was graphic novel, because I don't read graphic novels. And then another one was a book of poetry. And that was based off of your challenge of seeing that book, read a book of poetry, being like, I've never done that. And so let's challenge myself. I'm not putting myself in a box by saying that it has to be a specific 10 books before the end of the year. Let's mix it up and make it work for me. And then all the ones that I did post as potentials or options from my TBR are all books that I'm like, I could read those in the next 2 months. And the majority of them are BIPOC authors, so that I would be more inclined to read the BIPOC authors. And so having that front and center really helped me to be like, all right, I'm checking my boxes. I'm doing my thing that I said I wanted to do. And I'm also reading diversely. And so that makes me, one, feel good about myself, but also feel good about being able to promote the authors that tend to be not as promoted because the algorithm.
Yeah. And I feel like it's a problem with some people that are participating. We've seen a pattern in the survey answers. Some people are doing it for self-gratification. It really feels like that. They want to complete the challenge because it's a challenge, not because they want to support BIPOC authors. Some people don't even want to make the effort to look up books. They ask us for specific lists, for specific recommendations to vet authors that they should read. That is not the goal of the challenge. The goal is that you have to look up books either that fit the prompt or that you want to read, and that you have to make the effort to find these books by non-white authors, and that it has to become an habit so that you stop gravitating only towards white books. So many people participated in the challenge. So many people did it like with the good intentions, but also so many people are not fully there yet.
Yeah, that's so frustrating. And I can imagine, especially after putting in so much work and effort, to like intentionally be like, no, let's make this better. Let's do better, guys. And then have people half-ass it is so frustrating. And so I'm so sorry that you like struggling with that and people are approaching it in that sense. Here is to hopefully them changing their minds.
We changed some things for this new year. We loosened the grip a little bit. Let's see if this year is better or not. And then if this version also doesn't work, we're gonna do the same thing next year, do a survey and try to improve the challenge. Hopefully one day we'll get the not perfect result, because I don't think there's perfection, but close to perfect.
Yeah. Ugh. Thank you so much to you and Brittany for creating this, for putting in the time and the effort and the energy into being able to encourage people to diversify their shelves and to diversify their reading. So many props to you. Let's leave everyone with a challenge, because I think that you guys like challenges. So let's leave you with a challenge to really look at your numbers this year and look at last year's, look at 2024's numbers and say, how did I show up? Did I show up the way I wanted to? Did I show up the way that I should? Let's look at that. And then how can we adjust and shift from there? If y'all need specific recommendations, you're looking for, and like I could literally give you lists on lists. I'm looking for this trope. I got you. Here's 5 BIPOC authors that have books that have these tropes. It is so easy to find these. And for those of us who've been doing the work of curating these lists and compiling this information, there are so many resources out there. Follow BIPOC creators, follow people
Yeah.
who read diversely, join the Baseline Challenge, join the Alphabet BIPOC Challenge, join these things that are going to really push you, and also let it, especially if you're a mood reader, if you're like, wow, that book was really good, read another one by that author.
Yeah.
Keep going. It's okay. That's my challenge for everyone, is to really take a look inside and assess your reading. I think that we could do better.
Yeah, I also want to say to the people that look at the numbers and see that they're disappointing still, to not think it's the end of the world. You have time to improve. For example, when we thought of the challenge in 2023, my numbers, I was already reading BIPOC authors, and I already read quite a few by that time. But when I did the end of the year wrap up, I still saw that it was like 42%, if I remember correctly. And I had read like 110 books, maybe. It maybe was still more books than another person, but considering I read quite a lot, I read at least 100 books a year, that was still a disappointing number for me. I also participated in the challenge this year, obviously, and I can proudly say that my number is higher. I read multiple books for the challenge, but also from my own TBR, and now it's like more than half. And I didn't even see the switch. Don't regret reading more books. I want people to stop, I don't know, catastrophizing that they're not going to read white authors anymore and things like that. It's going to be okay. You're not even going to notice that you're missing them or things like that.
It's so true. I mean, I don't. Like, so many of the books that I've read this year have been banger after banger, and most of them are by BIPOC authors. I don't miss it at all. I don't feel like I missed out on certain books this year. I feel like everything I read, I loved and I enjoyed reading. Yes, there are a few that were like terrible, but actually almost every single one of those was by a white author that I DNF'd. That.
And also, if you're not reading the currently popular books, it's not going to be a tragedy. Trust me.
I know. I always get sorely disappointed in the popular books. I'm like, really, guys? Really? I do not recommend going with that route. So many indie authors create such incredible stories and such incredible books that it is worth looking outside of your algorithm and following BIPOC authors, BIPOC creators, people who are curating these lists and are reading diversely. Follow those people. They have so many recommendations. Like, we put in so much work for these recommendations, guys.
Yeah. And now more than ever, I think you should definitely support BIPOC authors, especially indie ones. In this sphere, you will find the most diversity.
Yes. Because the big five or whatever they're called, the publishing houses, they don't care. And they're going to follow where the Goodreads lists are going. They're going to follow that information. They're not going to follow what a lot of the rest of us are reading. And so it is up to us to support those indie authors and to push them towards their goals and help them and support them and uplift their stories because they are so impactful. Margherita, this has been so much fun. Thank you so much for being on. I feel like we had such a great conversation. Where can people find you, get to know you, connect with you online, read your books, etc.?
I am on TikTok and Instagram. I think the username is the same. It's themargherita.s. I have a Substack where sometimes I share silly thoughts, like the difference between asexuality and aromanticism. If you want, you can find the post on my Substack. but I also share regularly book lists, especially for the Diverse Baseline Challenge. It's usually my TBR, but I am a mood reader, so I never really read the books from the TBR, but find new books anyway to read for those prompts, but that's another story. I'm also on Instagram and TikTok as Robin Jo Margaret.
I will make sure that we have that linked in the description in the show notes for anyone who is doing other things while they're listening and want to make sure to connect with you. Again, thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me.